Last week, we announced charges against Sam Bankman-Fried for a sweeping fraud scheme that contributed to FTX's collapse, and for a campaign finance scheme that sought to influence public policy in Washington. As I said last week, this investigation is very much ongoing, and it's moving very quickly. I also said that last week's announcement would not be our last, and let me be clear once again, neither is today's. I want to make two announcements. First, I'm announcing that the Southern District of New York has filed charges against Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, and Gary Wang, a co-founder of FTX, in connection with their roles in the frauds that contributed to FTX's collapse. Both Ms. Ellison and Mr. Wang have pled guilty to those charges, and they are both cooperating with the Southern District of New York.
It appears Sam Bankman-Fried will be rolling deep on his way to the big house. His accomplices, Alameda's Caroline Ellison, and his FTX co-founder Gary Wang admitted to massive amounts of fraud that will likely lead to massive amounts of years in jail. At this time, they could be facing close to 3 centuries in prison between the three of them. Don't forget to smash the subscribe.
Well, this is the first time that we've heard from Caroline Ellison in her own words as to what was going on at FTX and Alameda before its collapse last month. And it's the same case with Gary Wang. If we look at what Caroline Ellison said during her plea hearing on December 19, she spoke to the relationship between FTX and Alameda. She said that Alameda was borrowing money from FTX.com and had an unlimited line of credit. This arrangement allowed Alameda to use this money without being required to post collateral and without having negative balances or without being subject to margin calls on FTX.com's liquidation protocols. She said she knew what was happening was wrong and that she was in agreement as well with Sam Bankman-Fried to not publicly disclose that Alameda was then going on to loan billions of dollars to FTX executives. She also said that Sam Bankman-Fried, herself and others had created balance sheets that made the financial health of Alameda look better than it actually was.
Ava, walk us through next steps here. Where do we go from here? What kind of charges are Caroline Ellison and, of course, Sam Bankman-Fried, as well as their deputies, looking at?
Well, Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang, who were some of Sam Bankman-Fried's closest associates within the FTX group, they have pleaded guilty to several fraud charges. Ellison has pleaded guilty to 7 different offences, including wire fraud. And Gary Wang, who co-founded FTX with Sam Bankman-Fried, has pleaded guilty to 4 charges. The prosecution revealed this only this week after Sam Bankman-Fried was on a flight midair on his way back to the US after consenting to extradition in the Bahamas. These 2 won't be sentenced until the rest of the FTX prosecution case is dealt with, because they are cooperating witnesses, and how much cooperation they give and how useful they are to the prosecution will go towards sort of balancing up, I guess, how much of a penalty and how much prison time they do down the track.
SBF's accomplices have their own butts to look after now. So when a plea deal was dangled in front of them for info on FTX's mountain of fraud, they sang like Beyoncé at halftime.
Let's start with this latest development and the plea deal, specifically Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang. How significant is that for the case?
Well, that is a huge, huge development. I mean, if you've been following the case, you know that recently Sam Bankman-Fried has been out there giving speeches, speaking to media, and he's essentially said, look, there may have been mistakes, but I didn't know. I didn't know anything was going wrong. I didn't know that we were using customer funds and sending it to Alameda. Now you have 2 of his business associates who have pled guilty. They pled guilty to conspiracy charges, so presumably they are going to point the finger at Sam Bankman-Fried. And it gives prosecutors a real insight into what was going on, because the case starts out initially with documents and text messages, but now that they're cooperating, you have an insider view into what was going on, so it's a huge development. Sam Bankman-Fried was charged in about a month. These Ellison and Wang signed cooperation agreements. Before those agreements are signed, it's a very long process typically. Typically, what happens before you enter into a cooperation agreement is you meet with the prosecutors multiple times. They check what you've said against other evidence they have to make sure you're telling the truth. Because the idea is when you sign a cooperation agreement, the government is vouching for you. They're saying, you're a witness I can put on the stand. And for them to enter into an agreement, they need to have certain indicia that you're telling the truth. And that usually takes quite a while, so that's impressive.
If there's a guilty plea here, why would the DOJ have any reason to make a deal with Sam Bankman-Fried when they have the goods and 2 cooperating witnesses? And is there any sense that they want a trial? They want daylight shined on this crime to stop further crimes?
Yeah, I mean, there might not be a plea deal, so to speak. The way it usually works, especially in the SDNY, there is no kind of bargaining deal for someone. They get leniency if they cooperate, like Ellison and Wang are doing now. And the way you cooperate is usually you help prosecutors build a case against someone else. And you put your finger on the issue here for Sam Bankman-Fried. He is the head of FTX. He is the top guy. So I don't know who he could cooperate against.